George Jackson, George Lester Jackson, born September 23, 1941, died August 21. Jackson Comrade George was a black revolutionary activist, member of the Black Panther Party, and author. While serving a 1-year-to-life sentence in the California penal system for the armed robbery of a gas station in 1961, Jackson became involved in black revolutionary politics. In 1970, Jackson wrote a classic book, Soledad Brothers. The Prison Letters of George Jackson, a combination autobiography and political manifesto. The book became a bestseller and earned Jackson personal fame, but it also marked Jackson as a security threat to the prison system and the American government. Jackson was assassinated during an alleged attempted prison escape in 1971. Essential quotes: "You can generally tell what processes a man's mind has gone through by what he studied, observed." George L. Jackson, "I've been patient, but where I'm concerned, patience has its limits. Take it too far and it's cowardice." George L. Jackson, "I repeat, realistic day-to-day needs should be the basis of organizing people and making them conscious of revolution. That the world, the universe, must revolve. That it will stop, stagnate, and die for no man's privilege." George Jackson, "When I consider my own experience bought at the cost of these terrible years, supplemented in love and concern by your own experience and learning, what am I to think but that something is radically wrong, that I am being betrayed and have been betrayed? The question is one of grave proportions to me. I cannot stress this point too clearly. I mean to make sure this doesn't happen to me again or to my seed. If a person doesn't stand with me, he stands against me to my way of thinking. I feel that you have failed me, Mama. I know that you have failed me. I also know that Robert has never held an opinion of his own. You have influenced his every thought ever since you have known him. You have always had the running of things. You have done him a disservice. You are doing John a disservice now. You are a woman. You think like a bourgeois woman. This is a predatory man's world. The real world calls for a predatory man's brand of thinking. Your way of viewing the world is necessarily bourgeois and feminine. How could I, Robert, John, or any of the men of our kind accomplish what we must as men if we think like bourgeois women, or let our women think for us? This is what's happening all over this part of the world. Robert should have been stronger, should have had more time and freedom of movement. So should grandfather and great-grandfather. But they didn't, and it isn't their fault. The cruelest and most suppressive treatment has always fallen to the males because they have not that tender defense the woman is born with. George Jackson, you must realize, understand fully, that we have little or no control over our lives. You must then stop giving yourself pain by feeling that you failed somewhere. You have not failed. You have been failed by history and events and people over whom you had no control. Only after you understand this can you then go on to make the necessary alterations that will bring some purpose and value to your life. You must gain some control. George Jackson, I was born knowing exactly nothing. I had no one to teach me the things of real value. The school systems are gauged to teach youth what to think, not how to think. Robert never had the time to say even hello. And neither of you really knew anything to give my anyway, because your parents knew nothing. Do you see where the cycle brings us? To the real source of the trouble, the alienation and the abandonment, the pressure from without, the system and its supporters. George Jackson, though I know I am a victim of social injustice and economic pressure, and though I understand the forces that work to drive so many of our kind to places like this and to mental institutions, I can't help but know that I proceeded wrong somewhere. I could have done a lot worse. You know our people react in different ways to this neo-slavery. Some just give in completely and join the other side. They join some Christian cult and cry out for integration. These are the ones who doubt themselves most. They are the weakest and hardest to reach with the new doctrine. Some become inveterate drinkers and narcotic users in an attempt to gain some mental solace for the physical depravity they suffer. I've heard them say, there's no hope without dope. Some hire on as a janitor, bellboy, rig cap, cook, elevator boy, singer, boxer, baseball player, or maybe a freak at some sideshow and pretend that all is as well as is possible. They think since it's always been this way, it must always remain this way. These are the fatalists. They serve and entertain and rationalize. George Jackson, I know that few blacks over here have ever been free. The forms of slavery merely changed at the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation from chattel slavery to economic slavery. If you could see and talk to some of the blacks I meet in here, you would immediately understand what I mean and see that I'm right. They are all average, all with the same backgrounds, and in for the same thing, some form of food getting. About 70 to 80% of all crime in the US is perpetrated by blacks. The sole reason for this is that 98% of our number live below the poverty level in bitter and abject misery. You must take off your rose-colored glasses and stop pretending. We have suffered an unmitigated wrong. How do you think I felt when I saw you come home each day a little more depressed than the day before? How do you think I felt when I looked in your face and saw the clouds forming? When I saw you look around and see your best efforts go for nothing? Nothing. I can count the times on my hands that you managed to work up a smile. George Jackson, I've told myself uncountable times that anger is an emotion, a degenerative emotion, unnecessary and controllable. But I couldn't control it until a few days ago when I observed myself being consumed by the force of my own weight. So, my friend, I started conducting these experiments with myself. Why can't I rid myself of the sorrow and emotion that awareness has brought me? I get rid of the self-destructive force of error and ignorance only to be torn and miserable by what I discover. It happened that I knew all along that some imbalance did exist, or I'll say a few imbalances existed, that disallowed me from progressing further in my development. I put my head in my hands and wondered, why do I make myself sick? Why can't I overcome this? Maybe I'm just human after all. I believe that is what got it. I am what I am, and that's all I am. I knew this morbid depression must have some human explainable cause, an imbalance somewhere. The mind and body cannot be separated. A physical imbalance can precipitate effects that could eventually lead to some mental imbalance. Too much sleep, too little, the wrong kind of food, too much, too little, too much reading in the wrong position, too much study, or too long an application to one subject results in imbalances, conflicts, struggles. I was looking for a solution from one direction only, when no event, no effect in nature, has a single cause. It's a collection of causes. So I look at myself and I discover new ways of knowing myself, seeing and placing myself in the vast scheme. George Jackson, the men of our group have developed as a result of living under a ruthless system a set of mannerisms that numb the soul. We have been made the floor mat of the world, but the world has yet to see what can be done by men of our nature, by men who have walked the path of disparity, of regression, of abortion, and yet come out whole. There will be a special page in the book of life for the men who have crawled back from the grave. This page will tell of utter defeat, ruin, passivity, and subjection in one breath, and in the next, overwhelming victory and fulfillment. George Jackson, All my life now you have told me about European gods and European Christians who were supposed to be knowledgeable. When do you plan to say something that will help me? You may not know any better. If not, I am wrong in saying what I have. But I find it hard to admit that my mother could be so insensitive to the truth. You disrespect me, Mama, when you talk to me like that. It's like you saying to me, George, you're a fool. You do not have eyes to see, ears to hear, and a brain to interpret. So I'll tell you any kind of outrageous story. Ordinary people, the mediocre, need to feel or believe in something greater than themselves. It gives them false security, and it makes them feel that help may be forthcoming. This is self-delusion in the extreme. I cannot partake in any foolishness. Do you want me to be mediocre like the rest of the herd? When I need strength, Mama, I reach down within myself. I draw out of the reserves I've built the necessary endurance to face down my opposition. I call on myself. I have faith in myself. This is where it must always come from, in the inner self. I place no one and nothing above myself. What any man has done before me I can do. If there is a God, Mama, he hates me, and I'll have to resist what he or it is doing to us. All my life, Mama, I've had to work things out for myself. I've had help from no quarter. I've been alone now for a long time. This is why I've had so much pain and trouble. Robert gave me nothing. You gave me God and that horrible church. Even God managed to take something away from me. I have nothing left but myself. George Jackson, don't wait for me to change or modify my attitudes in the least. I cannot understand, as you put it, or as you would have me understand. I am a black man. Mama, you're a black woman. Being a woman, you may expect to be and enjoy being tyrannized. Perhaps you actually like walking at the heel of another, or otherwise placing yourself beneath another. But for me, this is despicable. I refuse to even attempt to understand why I should debase myself or concede or compromise any part, the smallest part, of anything on earth to anyone who is not of my kind in thought and form. I love you, Mama, but I must be frank. Why did Papa die alone and hungry? Why did you think me insane for wanting a new bicycle instead of the old one I stole piece by piece and put together? Why did you allow us to worship at a white altar? Why even now, following tragedy after tragedy, crisis after crisis, do you still send John to that school where he is taught to feel inferior? And why do you continue to send me Easter cards? This is the height of disrespect you show me. You never wanted me to be a man, nor John either. You don't want us to resist and defeat our enemies. What is wrong with you, Mama? No other mama in history has acted the way you act under stress situations. I won't be a good boy ever. George Jackson, regarding this domestic issue, I must be the first to admit that I see that the black family unit is in ruins. It is our first and basic weakness. This fact may contribute much to our difficulty in uniting as a people. But for every effect there is a cause. If we are to understand and heal these effects, we must understand the causes. To say that the black family unit is slowly eroding because of pressures from without, poverty and social injustice, and from within the negative response to crisis situation, is to completely mistake the depth of the issue. There are three historical factors that have produced the present state of chaos on the family level of our black society. First, the family unit was destroyed during chattel slavery. Men had the sense of family responsibility trained out of them. Second, our culture, institutions, and customs, upon which unity depends and without which cohesiveness can never exist, were destroyed and never replaced. The best we could do was ape the Afe and cling to a kind of subculture that manifests itself today in the hideous notion that if we educate ourselves properly, think the right thoughts, read the right books, say the right things, and do exactly that which is expected of us, we can then be as good as white people. Third, our change in status from an article of movable property to untrained misfits on the labor market was not, as most think, a change to freedom from slavery, but merely to a different kind of slavery. George Jackson: people the world over are not the same, but those that we meet here in the U.S. are generally of a single type. By and large, they are all fools, intellectual nonpersons, emotional half-wits. Status symbols, supervisory positions, and petty power motivate their every act. Personal, individual, financial success at any price is their social ethic, the only real standard upon which their conduct is built. For us blacks in particular, this is an nightmare proposition. When this standard, this criterion for the measurement of individual merit and worth in this society, is applied to us, measured against our standing or holdings, we cannot help but come out with a very low opinion of ourselves. From the womb to the tomb, this plays in our minds. We are not worth more than the amount of capital we can raise. That is why you see blacks pretending to be doing all right. That is why a black man will buy a new car, status symbol, before he will buy food for his child or clothes for his wife. And again, with blacks, this whole thing goes even deeper. No man or group of men have been more denuded of their self-respect. None in history have been more terrorized, suppressed, repressed, and denied male expression than the U.S. black. George Jackson, part of the credo of the neo-slave, the latter-day slave, who is free to move from place to place if he can come by the means, is to shuffle away from any situation that becomes too difficult. He stayed with us, worked 16 hours a day, after which he would eat, bathe, and sleep, period. He never owned more than 2 pairs of shoes in his life, and in the time I was living with him, never more than 1 suit. Never took a drink, never went to a nightclub, expressed no feelings about such things, and never once reminded any one of us, or so it seemed, never expected any notice of the fact that he was giving to us all of the life force and activity that the monster machine had left to him. The part that the machine seized, that death of the spirit visited upon him by a world that he never influenced, was mourned by us, and most certainly by me, but no one ever made a real effort to give him solace. How do you console a man who is unapproachable? George Jackson: to the black male, the losses were most tragic of all. It will do us no good to linger over the fatalities. They're numberless and beyond our reach. But we who have survived must eventually look at ourselves and wonder why. The competition at the bottom of the social spectrum is for symbols, honors, and objects of black against itself. Black against lower-class whites and browns. Virulent, cutthroat, backstabbing competition. The American way of life. But the fascists cooperate. The 4 estates of power form a morbid lone quadrangle. This competition has destroyed trust. Among the black males, a premium has been placed on distrust. Every other black male is viewed as the competition. The wise and practical black is the one who cares nothing for any living ass. The cynic who has gotten over any principles he may have picked up by mistake. We can't express love on the supposition that the recipient will automatically use it against us as a weapon. We're going to have to start all over again. This next time around, we'll let it all hang out. We'll stop betraying ourselves, and we'll add some trust and love. George Jackson: it's no coincidence that Malcolm X and ML King died when they did. Malcolm X had just put it together 2 and 3. I seriously believe they knew all along, but were holding out and presenting the truth in such a way that it would affect the most people situationally without getting them damaged by gunfire. You remember what was on his lips when he died. Vietnam and economics, political economy. The professional killers could have murdered him long before they did. They let Malcolm rage on Muslim nationalism for a number of years because they knew it was an empty ideal. But the second he got his feet on the ground, they murdered him. We die too easily. We forgive and forget too easily. Gentle and refined people, aren't we? We'll make good communists. If someone deals with the fascists for us, that was a little bitter. Pay no attention to stuff like that. I have more faith in our resilience than is healthy for me. If what I said about ML King is true, and I'm going to put it down as if I were positive that it is, he was really on our side, the billions of righteous. His image can be used. I mean, we can just claim him and use his last statements and his image to strengthen ours. And Malcolm can also be reformed. George Jackson, settle your quarrels. Come together. Understand the reality of our situation. Understand that fascism is already here. That people are already dying who could be saved. That generations more will live poor, butchered half-lives if you fail to act. Do what must be done. Discover your humanity and your love in revolution. George L. Jackson, I'll never trade my self-determination for a car, cheap mass-produced clothes, clapboard house, or a couple of nights a week at the go-go. Control over the circumstances that surround my existence is of the first importance to me. Without this control, or with control in someone else's hands, I am forever insecure, subject at all times to the whim and caprice of the man in control. And you and I know how whimsical some men can be. George Jackson, I don't want to die and leave a few sad songs and a hump in the ground as my only monument. I want to leave a world that is liberated from trash, pollution, racism, nation-state wars and armies, from pomp, bigotry, parochialism, 1,000 different brands of untruth and licentious, usurious economics. George Jackson,